Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar on Amazonian climate change governance. I am really happy to be here with two of my colleagues, Catalina Vallejo from University of Bergen and Danielle Hanna from the FGV from Rio from Brazil. Welcome you, Danielle and Catalina, and to all the audience. We are going to be having a small conversation with Danielle and Catalina, and then please make your questions through the Q&A or through the chat that we are going to read, and I am going to read it, and we are going to try to answer and to keep this more as a conversation than a formal presentations. So when we were discussing about this topic, like 2 or 3 years ago with Catalina, Danielle, and some other colleagues from the Low-Tron Forum, we were thinking on how this international framework that has been created around climate change land in the countries. And trying to also to understand why there has been so many positive developments and at the international level, still there have not been enough to stop down the main reasons of climate change in one region of the world that is really important to stop climate change, that is the Amazon. And the Amazon is interesting because it's shared by different countries, so it's also have to deal with all the national, regional, and local dimensions, and but it's a shared space also. So in a way, the borders are more like artificial, because at the end it's the same basin, is a space that is shared, but it's affected by all these different national and subnational dimensions of governance and power relations and politics, of course. So our attempt has been to try to understand this, how these dimensions at the national, subnational levels affect how these international norms land, and how all these relations at the local, at the national level, and the national level also emerge and affect and shape the discussions and the creation of new frames at the global level. That's the idea of the project, and the idea of to have the discussion here is to try to understand better, for example, why in the last years deforestation has been a huge thing in Peru, in Colombia, in Brazil, despite all these frameworks and agreements and goals and indicators that has been set by the countries. So saying that, I don't want to expand more. I would like to invite Danielle and Catalina, so that you can turn on your cameras, please, and start with you, Danielle, and because I think it's also that we have a lot of discussions about Brazil, why this is important to understand, and how Brazil can give a good example of the importance of seeing this governance of the Amazon. Please, Danielle.
Thank you very much, Camila. Good morning, everyone. We are still in the morning period here in Brazil, and I thank you very much for the opportunity to come to talk about such an important topic of research agenda. So I think, as Camila was saying now, we really need to understand in detail what's going on in terms of governance in the Amazon region right now. So we had time, I think, and Camila was saying that, for more than 30 years to understand this international architecture of global climate change in a way. Right, so we even played out with different architectures, top-down architecture at first, when the Kyoto Protocol was there. And then now we have the bottom-up approach with the Paris Agreement. But now it's really time for us to understand how this global regime impacts, influences local and global arrangements, and how these global and local arrangements of this Amazon region, for example, will influence this global climate change. So this very important concept of polycentric approach, I think, will come out in this research that we have been discussing for the last 3 years. But before turning the floor to Catalina, I'd like to anticipate more or less the focus of our attention here today about the political determinants of this environmental governance. I think it's quite important for us to start looking at this. So yes, the Amazon now is at the center of this global climate crisis, without a doubt. And I think part of the responsibility for that comes from the Brazilian government, right? And since our far-right president was sworn in 2019, I think he has managed somehow quite successfully to implement his anti-environmental agenda. And that's something that we should really discuss, how he has implemented this anti-environmental agenda that impacts the Amazon region so closely. So as for this, the consequence, how can we grasp this anti-environmental agenda, I think we are witnessing, without a doubt, this rising in deforestation numbers. That's quite evident that we have that. And this deforestation is followed by an unprecedented forest fires, I think, in the Amazon. The Amazon data, for example, shows 8 straight months of rising deforestation. So I think that's quite important. So, and how this Bolsonaro's administration is faring with this deforestation followed by fires and so on and so forth. So at first, they said, "No, it's not my problem. I don't have anything to do. There's no problem in the Amazon region," right? The second moment was the moment where they blame NGOs, especially transnational NGOs, for causing all this problem. So because they say they are against his government. And now I think we are in the moment of the government launching this propaganda for foreign investors, for states, important states as Norway, for example, by saying that they are on top of things. So we are managing to solve the situation, but of course, we are not managing to solve the situation. So I think that the conversation that I would like to have here with Camila and Catalina is about these political determinants that are so important to play out in the environmental governance of the Amazon and how this is going on. So the modus operandi, if I may say, how this current government from Brazil is managing to implement and being quite successful with this anti-environmental agenda to the detriment of the Amazon protection. So that's something that I'd like to come back to. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Danielle. But it's also like, plus all these political determinants, there's also the role of the courts in some countries that has been super important. So I would like to Catalina to introduce what has been the role of the courts on the governance.
Kata, you were muted.
Can you hear me now? Yes, that's better. Okay, thank you so much. So I was saying, Camila and Danielle, thank you. So good to see you again. We've been talking about this project for some years, and when we met in Bergen, we discussed the problems of the Amazon and how relevant the Amazon is for climate change, for the global situation. And we ask questions as social scientists and lawyers, what can we do about this? What can help us think about these problems? Yeah, so as Camila said, one of the key topics is the role of judges, of the courts. So this is I know this topic is a little bit controversial, because especially in Europe, the discussion about what judges or what courts can do in a democracy is not an easy one, especially when it comes to climate change. So here in Norway, we recently had a climate court case, and this was the key topic, right? Can judges actually say something about policy issues, or is this a matter only for the parliament and for the executive branch to deal with? So the approach we have in this project is a different one. So we see judges as one of those democratic institutions in society, and we also subscribe to the idea that governing an issue, a topic or a problem is not only for the executive branch. So civil society has an important place in governing a problem, but also all the other actors of society. And as such, with some authors like Harry Mariosowski and other authors who have been studying, the governing or administration of difficult, complex social issues, they have said that there are many levels of norms in society for governing the difficult or complex issues, and it's kind of a diagonal dimension what different actors can add to the transformation of these problems. And part of that is in climate change, the role of courts. Why? Because we know parliaments are made of the majorities representing political parties in society. And sometimes decisions made by parliaments, even though they are democratic, are not necessarily protecting the needs or the rights of minorities. And in climate change, it is a very important topic. Climate change is relevant also in human rights. We know the rights of minorities like indigenous communities or Afro-descendant communities in the Amazon are important for climate change. And they are not necessarily considered when parliaments make decisions on climate laws or climate regulations. So this is one important way in which courts are definitely, their voice is definitely needed in climate change regulation. Another thing is who controls the decisions made by the executive branch. So judges have constitutional duties to control the governments who are in power in any given moment. We don't want executive branches, national governments who can do anything, who can use their power in an unlimited or uncontrolled way. We need an institution like the courts to be able to perform judicial review of certain decisions. And in this climate laws and regulations are really, really key, right? Because we know that's very obvious. There are many economic interests at stake, and many in the industry, lobbyists also pushing for parliaments to make certain decisions. So yes, judges need to be active in climate change by performing judicial review of decisions made by governments, also in the countries where this is possible, judicial review of new laws on climate change or climate relevant laws, and protecting human rights of everyone, but especially ethnic minorities and other minorities.
Thank you, Catalina. Yeah, so I think this is interesting because one thing that is characteristic from climate change and in general also when you speak about deforestation or degradation of the soil, this is portrayed as technical issues, no? So it's hard science and this is technical in the approach that you propose solutions. But as Danielle is saying, there has been a lot of the political determinants around this, and I think that is something that not all the times is sincere and put straightforward like that, because we have these agreements and in a way this architecture has to land in something, and that is not so explicit in a way, no? And also like national laws have to land in something, and in what they land is on the structures of governance, and the structures of governance are shaped by politics, no? So also I mean, you can have the infrastructure, like say the state institutions that they are supposed to have to implement this, but if they don't have budget or they don't have the correct people in place, then they are not going to do what they're supposed to do. But in the checklist of you create the agency or whatever, yes, you have decentralized these I don't know, functions, yes, and that, but this is landing on something. And I think that is something that we need to understand better, why this is, when land is okay and when no, and what are the things behind of that. And what did you say, Danielle, because Danielle, is that in the case of Brazil, for example, you have all this infrastructure that was built up to try to work with climate change, not in the perfect way, because for sure they have a lot of weakness, but still you have that. But if you take up and put the wrong people there, then it's just dismantling the whole thing. And I would like to hear more about what has going on in Brazil in the last years, no? To check, to see what is the impact of this political change that has no more to do with the executives taking the control of these institutions.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for coming to this important, very important, and I think the courts are going to be necessary also because of this consequence. So first of things, yes, Brazil was quite good to create this network of protection of the environment via federal agencies, so technical experts around these issues. So we had a really good body of overseeing the protection of the environment. Not perfect, as you said, but that was something that was going on. So from 2004 to 2012, Brazil has managed to have quite a good score in the declining the curve of deforestation. So it was after 2012 that this curve has started to increase again. And now it's more evident than ever, 2019 to 2021, that's in a worst shape, right? So first things first, the way that I would like to explore this concept with you, and then we can discuss, is how they are doing that, this deregulation, this deregulation that's going on. So what they do, so they know how to use legal instruments. It's quite obvious that they know how to use legal instruments against the rule of law itself. So they managed to maintain the facade, as you said, of federal agencies, important federal agencies for the protection of the environment, such as IBAMA, ICMBio, FUNAI, that's the protection of indigenous communities. They are there. So on the facade, the legality of things, they are quite there in place. But what do? So they implement via administrative acts, decrees or ordinance, something that changed their function. So they, for example, they managed to withdraw the function of sanctioning process, for example. That's the first one. or they change the proper, who is going to supervise a certain process for land regularization, for example. So that is something that's, that amounts to deregulation at the end of the day, right? So I can give you concrete examples of that. But as to the concept that we are discussing here, there was this author, Shepels, she said something about autocratic legalism. It's how you use legal instruments against the rule of law. You do not destroy it completely, you destroy it by the edges. So that's what's happening. So a concrete example here, I would say, it's a decree from 2019 that reduced the capacity of these environmental agencies to find wrongdoings by creating this extra step before these fines are paid by environmental offenders. This extra step, they named it environmental conciliations hearing, right? So the problem with these environmental conciliations hearings that they have not taken place, and because of that, it's almost useless as a deterrent process. So that's one example. A second example that we have here is this joint ordinance from 2020 that transfers the oversight and responsibility for land control. That's something very important. And I was discussing that with Catalina before we entered here in our conversation. From the federal agents. So they are the ones responsible for regularizing land, the land regularization process in the Amazon, for example. I don't know if you know, but 45% of the land of the Amazon is public. So we have this problem of land grabbing. People enter there and they say, okay, that's my land, I want to regularize it. And usually it's a federal agent who oversees this whole process, but now they are transferring this responsibility to municipalities that usually lack control over these very complicated land regularization problems. And now we have this bill on the environmental licensing that's also about emptying the functions of these important agencies, right? So everything is done legally or not. I think that's why we need the courts to say what is this illegal discretion that they are given to bureaucracies, to administrative agencies and so on. So we have to see or to delve deeper into these administrative acts, these ordinances, in order to say if it's not legal, what can we do about that? So that's why we need courts now more than ever. So I think the name of the problem that we are dealing here is this autocratic legalism that we need to understand a little bit better in order for us to understand the whole problem of the environmental governance of the Amazon region.
Thank you, Danielle. Yeah, I think that is it's really important, and I think we see the same case here in Peru, that we have been developing like a framework of and institutions with a lot of support from the international cooperation that say this is again as a technical thing. So you create institutions, you create the whole thing, but then how, when they operate, how much power they have is also something to do, and it's not only and that is political power, no? In Peru, in 2014 was this huge operation called Operación Amazonas in a region that is in the border with Brazil, in the Amazon, that is Ucayali, and they confiscate the different the tax office with the forest authorities. They confiscate a big load of timber, and they stopped this timber that was going to in República Dominicana, in Dominican Republic. And the thing that was interesting is that because the forest authorities were saying that this was timber that was illegally extracted from the Amazon, but they didn't have the support from the executive in that point, because they were also the Minister of Trade and that went to the states to say no, that's not so true, and that kind of stuff. And at the same time, you have at the national parliament the representative of Cayali and another Amazon region trying to change the law to stop this kind of operation to happen again, to take them out some control on the capacity to confiscate. And at the same time, at the local time, there were riots and burning of the offices of these forests, because there is an economy here, there is people with economic power, and of course it's a source of work for a lot of people. But most of the time, when you try to understand the thing of illegal logging and that, you see this is a local problem with some poor people that need to extract the wood and that, the timber, but you don't see these more dimensions of the political powers, economic power, the elites that are also playing a role in all this, no? So that is also important. And also it's important the role of the courts, because how you sometimes you put this in place is to say, okay, this is going to be a crime. You extract the timber, it's going to be a crime. And then you need judges that are capable to judge the whole thing, no? And we have a case in Peru, in Loreto, in the case of the Grupo Melca, that way they were devastating a huge area of primary forest. And so there was a lot of evidence saying that they were doing this. There was a first instance ruling that saying, yeah, this is not okay, and they prosecute them. But then you have other judges that say no. And in Lima, because in Peru you can make this thing of change the case, and then just you destroy the whole thing and the implementation of the whole, I would say, apparatus of trying to stop illegal logging, no? So there's all these things that has to put in place, and how you make this to work together is really difficult and go beyond just this architecture of things the country has to try to commit and to say they are not going to deforestate. Okay, how they are going to do that, how independent are these agencies, how much budget you put, and that kind of stuff. And I think that probably in Colombia they use things quite similar, Catalina. It is interesting because Catalina is in Norway.
Yes.
Here from Latin America, we are doing well.
My camera is refusing completely to. But now, you can hear me now? Yes. Camila, no, definitely. And I think one of the most interesting aspects of our project is, for me, exploring these assumptions that, because a state signs and ratifies the Paris Agreement and commits internationally to reduce deforestation or stop deforestation of the Amazon, like in our 3 countries, you assume, or internationally, there is this assumption that there is a global regime of norms and the state has agreed to it, so they will just comply because they signed it and ratified it. But it's so interesting to see that in reality, states are like governments, states are diverse. So are composed and made by humans who hold office for some term, and they are diverse. And even under one national government, there is a lot of diversity. So I guess in your countries it's similar, but in Colombia, you can have a Ministry of Environment or a representative from the Ministry of Environment who attends the COP, the Climate Change Conference of the Party, or Biodiversity, or other COPs. And they really are people who care about these issues, and they actually work hard to have this ratified at home. Sometimes you have a Ministry of Environment who is completely in a different page, but still they end up signing and ratifying the agreements. So you have to think about how different, the different actors you have in your country. You cannot expect just compliance, right? Then if you go subnationally, you have administrative decentralization, not necessarily at the subnational level or local level. You have an agreement with the national government. So you can have a lot of difference and a lot of tension within the very state, within the very same government, that it makes it difficult to comply with these regulations. And also, there are the private actors and there are the different even legal systems. We have legal pluralism in our countries. We have indigenous communities have their own law, and it is respected by the state. It has to be respected by the state. And many times there is no conversation, and there is no direct dialogue or understanding between the global level and the national. They are far away from Bogota, Lima, right? In Brazil is the same, and there is no conversation between these actors, so we cannot expect compliance to be easy. And globally, the assumption is somehow that it's, as Camila said, local actors, especially people living in poverty, who are using deforestation as means to, get a living, or illegal actors who are doing the wrong thing. But if we all are on the same page when it comes to international agreements, we will be able to apply the law and stop this. But the actors of the deforestation are very diverse, and at times it is the very state who is the main actor of deforestation, because they have planning programs that are based on extractivism, as is the trend in the whole Latin America. So it is interesting, and it would be really, I'm very curious what will be, the future findings of our project in terms of who are other drivers of deforestation, how are the intrinsic or how are actors within the same state actor in tension when it comes to stopping or making deforestation less of a problem. Yes, that's what I have to say for now.
Yeah, I think that is interesting, because many times when they speak about the Amazon, it's like they are speaking about a place that is empty, no? Or it's just trees. And it's not that. And it's also not a place that is only indigenous people, because the territory has been taken by other people, probably with more, for sure, with more economic power and more political power in that sense also, that is attached. And so that makes the things kind of difficult to try to implement this infrastructure. And I think that is also to take into consideration. And there is also some government dynamics of this state that is absent, and then you force in a way the local communities to deal with these power groups, or maybe just local power groups that want to explode the Amazon. When the state is not there, then it's difficult for them. And in the case of Peru and Colombia with coca plantations, that is a lot, because then you can force them and illegal activities that they are not easy, or gold mining also, no? So it's also important to see, because sometimes these entrepreneurs that come to the Amazon, they say to the communities, I am going to build you a school, I am going to build you a health post. That's at least that is something that we have been finding in Peru in the research, and the community say, okay, I mean, because the state is not there, and it's not there also in purpose, no, in a way, no. Mm-hmm. and they sell a piece of their land that is exploded, polluted, and the river polluted, and everything is a disaster. But it's the only way that they have to have a school or a health post that is needed. No, so I think it's also this dynamic that how is the state presence in that areas, and how much they just don't care, forcing these relations and in a way trade of the Amazon is also something important to see. And in the other side is also that, as I say at the beginning, this is a shared space. This is a basin of the Amazon, no? So the Amazon River. And to what extent these countries are seeing this as a shared space is something that has been changing during the years, because also in the last year we have been saying in these countries a lot of these more nationalist discourses that say this is my resource, no? Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to ask you, Danielle, and then please can you ask questions to the audience so we can start to collect some questions. But before that, I want to ask to Danielle how you see this more like the regional, like international agreements, or at the regional level. If there is something there were something there, and there is no anymore. Escazú, I think, is a case, but we have not been signing Escazú, so yeah.
Maybe I would like to continue to talk about these indigenous communities and how courts play an important role here in Brazil. So, and also this nationalist government of the far-right President Jair Bolsonaro. So they are all playing their interests here, and how this can somehow create a platform for showing the world the agenda of the indigenous communities from Brazil. So what happened is that since 2019, Bolsonaro has stopped this demarcation process of indigenous lands in the Amazon, right? And that was very problematic, because what we have been looking and witnessing once again is that, for example, the lands of Yanomami and Munduruku, they are being harassed and attacked by agribusiness, by illegal miners and loggers. So that has caught the international agenda. But somehow also, I think, and that's something that we are going to study it for sure, that somehow they are being organized in order to present their case in front of the Supreme Court. So because of these attacks and because they are being harassed, so they got COVID-19, so they are being infected by COVID-19. So they asked for the Supreme Court, for example, to play a role, to ask for the government to have this sanitary shield in order to protect them. And the court so far, the decision of the court was to implement a decision that promoted a dialogue with the government. But how can you promote a dialogue with the government when the government doesn't want to have this dialogue with the indigenous community, when they have shut down all the opportunities and the local forums for this dialogue? So you see how important it is to also have this imposition from the Supreme Court. Sometimes it's not only about dialogue, it's also about saying you have to protect these indigenous communities in a certain way, and not also to have this transformative constitutional agenda to say, let's promote this dialogue with the indigenous communities. That so far didn't happen, and they are open to COVID transmissions. They have been attacked. The military are not really there. So we have been facing this problem right now. So the last week and this week, we have seen that. So I think that's super important. Maybe the Paris Agreement gave a platform for conversation with the indigenous communities that was more evident than the Kyoto Protocol process. So we need this network also of civil society movements in order to say we have a problem here, and that's the Amazon, this so diverse problems, lot of dimensions of the problems, different actors with different precedents here to solve the problem that right now, for my perspective so far, they are trying to solve it, Supreme Court, but they haven't managed. So that was a problem that would like to say something about this specific actor that we will try to study more closely?
On my question on the international level, you as a professor from international law.
Yes, the international law, I think maybe we have, okay, the international law has a limit. So maybe we achieved the limit. Now we need to see these global, local, in how they play with each other. So maybe the international agreement so far, it's very, I think that the international response so far hasn't been quite effective, to use this word, but yes, it has started. We have been talking about this, but now we need more. I think we need more flesh into how can we respond to this problem. It's so complex of climate change. So maybe I don't have, as international legal lawyer, I don't have the answer for that, no.
That used to happen. Catalina.
Yeah, I know, but I have a question for the two of you before maybe we get questions from other people, because I'm thinking, you know, in the Colombian Amazon, one of the main tools we have for forest conservation and for ecosystem protection is the figure of national parks, right? So ecosystems or entire area that are protected by law as places for conservation. However, and there is a lot of work being done by the national parks of Colombia, and I think it really is an important tool. And indigenous communities living there play a very important role in the conservation of these areas. But also, as we know, it's not because the law protects, you know, this very specific area that there are no other actors, legal or illegal, entering and also grabbing this land legally and illegally, right? There are also individuals who get titles, property titles for portions of land nearby national parks, and there is a lot of illegal mining and extraction going on there as well. You know, in Colombia, there is a problem of armed conflict and armed non-state groups. I wanted to know if in Brazil and Peru, this is an important figure as well, and if it does play a role or not, if you know.
Okay, I will start and then give the word to Danielle. That there is also a question to you, Danielle, on the role of how independence are recourse in Brazil. But I think that the parks are an important tool, has been, and this is a trend that started in the 70s, no? Or probably before, but in the case of Peru, they started to create like the parks in the Amazon as a way to conserve the spaces, so also in the mountains and the paramos and all that, the waterlands and that. And yes, it's important, but again, it's not that what do we do with the people there? Because the Amazon is not an empty space, no? And then you have indigenous communities, at least in the case of Peru, and I think it's the same in the whole region, that indigenous community that has been claiming to have the territory recognized by the state. And this is the historic territory. So they're supposed to have the right to do that. And that has not been recognized. So sometimes you create parks that are in the territory of the indigenous communities that are asking to have the control of these indigenous communities. No? So that is a thing that has been controversial, of how much you take into consideration the rights of the territory of the indigenous communities in the territory of the park. Of course, there has been developments. I think that is more fluid, but still you have some cases in Peru that has been studied that the things haven't been so easy for the indigenous communities to deal with. That's one thing. The other thing is that there is a lot of literature that is showing that indigenous communities are good preserving the forest because they know how to manage the forest. So they can explore the forest, they can live in the forest, and they know how to manage the forest without destroying the Amazon. And that is something that is not recognized. Even when you make a park, you're saying this is the best way. Probably no, probably you give the land to this guy that has been there forever, and they know how, but you just protect them also. You give the guard parks, the state have the presence then also to help the indigenous to protect the territory. And I think that is something that we don't see, no? Mm-hmm. Like the state aiming to put, because in a way it's okay, if this is your territory, then it's your responsibility. Mm-hmm. And then they have to come, travel 10 hours by boat, say there are illegal loggers in my territory. And then the people from the police and say, no, but, and that's true, they don't have resources to go 10 hours by boat. So this is also a thing of the state presence. The parks are a tool, yes. It's not the only tool. There is a lot of literature studies showing that indigenous people are the best at protecting the Amazon. You have to give them probably the tools and defend the territory with them, not against them. And I think that is something that has to take also into consideration. No? Danielle.
I don't have much to add. I think Camila said everything about the topic. Something that even you, Catalina, can say something even about Brazilians now, that the political representation of indigenous communities that we have been seeing so far, it's quite one here and one in the Senate, one in the House of Representatives. But that's quite important. So they have been having this voice. They want to participate in these political representations, not only about self-determination of their lands, it's also about participating with the people who take the decision. So having a voice in the parliament, I think it's quite important for them, and we have to look at this movement. I think it's important. About the question of the independence of the courts, because as I said, the courts are going to be really these checks and balances from the executive government, and they are independent. But they are inserted in this polarized context that we are living here in Brazil. So we have to take that into account. So when the Supreme Court does not have the courage, if I may say so, to enforce a decision about you have to give protection to the Munduruku lands, to the Munduruku indigenous communities, or the Yanomamis that are being harassed in daylight. So we have a video showing them they have been attacked with guns, for example. Why is that? Why the Supreme Court still maintains a dialogue? Why don't they just give this imposition, these military forces, you have to be there all the time in order to protect their land? So that might give us some, oh my God, we are more polarized than we wanted to believe. So even the courts are very cautious on how they deal with these situations. So yes, we are independent. That's something that they have, these independent functions from the other powers. But on the other hand, we are living in this very polarized with this far-right president that wants to, in a way, create chaos, so governed by chaos. So I think that also plays its part.
Thank you.
For me,
no. I know there is more questions from the audience. You can put it in the chat on the Q&A.
Mm-hmm. If not, maybe we can mention very briefly the elections in Peru. There will be a decision today. Colombia is going through chaos socially, and there is a trend of a populist trend in different countries of the world. And it is important how this also affects the Amazon and the deforestation problem, right? It's very sad if it ends up as it is, maybe becoming a left, right wing type of discussion, when it really is something very different. I don't know, how do you see it, Camila and Danielle?
I think that's very interesting. I just wanted to say something about that, about this relationship between right-wing populist and climate change. So usually populist leaders, they have this anti-environmental agenda going on. So I think we need to understand a little bit more the causes and consequences of that relationship. I know that's very simplistic, to say, yes, populists, they are against climate change, they are climate denialists, but usually we can discuss, there's a very incident or literature on the subject. So they are against global regimes, right? So everything that climate change is, so far, we have a global regime. They are against technocrats, they are against these elites from other places. So it's everything that climate change represents so far. So that's why we have these nationalists and nativists, populist discourses. So this literature that tries to connect different types of populists, and maybe Brazil is a different type of populist than other Latin American countries, but how that plays out in the governance of the climate change. I think that's really important literature to understand these connections on climate change and populist and far-right movement. So I think that's a very interesting topic of future research, maybe.
Yeah, we need to go with the autocracies, no? Because the right wing is for sure a trend in many places, but you also have places like Venezuela that has not been also super responsible with the management of the Amazon, no? And and that is a difficult one. And here in Peru, in these elections, climate change and that has been absolutely out of the discussion during the whole political campaign. That has been tough, and there has been in many issues, and there has not been there. And I think this is important because it shows also, I mean, is that they don't want to show what is going to be the approach to this, and in both cases, I think there is this issue of the nationalism, that these our resources and we are going to explode them as we want. This is difficult, no? It's difficult. We have approved a climate change law, we have a lot of things in paper, but how that is going to be implemented is something still to see. And I think that is something that we need to discuss much more in this country. Because there is also this the government sometimes, the executive doesn't want to provide, for example, more territorial control to the indigenous, as in the case of Brazil in Peru. And with the COVID, it was clear that was the way to try to stop, no? To allow them to have the territorial control and to put a barrier there. And they didn't want it, and many of them, I mean, thousands of them has been killed by the disease. When in some communities that they managed to have this control, it showed that was a super effective tool, no? So there is a responsibility also for the executive that say to not allow this more territorial control for them to not, I think, to not create any kind of precedents, no? And that is problematic. Well, if there is no more question from the audience, I think we have 5 minutes to close this. I really want to thank Danielle, Catalina, and Lutron for Mateo and Angel from the UB Global for organizing this, to have the space to chat.